one house for every man, woman, and child. We didn't do that. We didn't do that this time, but if we would have done that, we have way too many houses. You can't have 4-year-olds living alone in a house. We would probably tear down a house and build a basketball court or something like that. We've accidentally built way too many houses. The price of houses have to drop to below what it costs to manufacture them. We've built so many houses. And if you would let the market take care of this, the banks go out of business. And I'm going to again talk about the monetary collapse we're going to have instead of letting the banks go out of business, which is much worse. Like this crisis would have been bad. It would have been tough. You would have to tell your landlord, hey, I can't pay rent this month maybe, but I'm going to cover you later. The Soviets did that without any blood spill in the streets when they had that transition, when they went bankrupt. But we would have been able to figure it out. Like if I invented the better mousetrap today, I could have. You don't think someone would have financed it $1 million with LendingTree.com, or I would have found, like, we would have pulled this off somehow. Maybe IOUs for a while or whatever. But we would have been able to not, like, everyone would have been kicked out on the streets by their landlord the next day. That wouldn't have been made sense even for the landlords. But hold on. So we overbuilt way too many houses. So right now, if we would let the banks go out of business, house prices would drop precipitously. And maybe you keep on living in your current house. You won't make a $200,000 mortgage payment anymore, but instead, so maybe someone would buy the house for $40,000, and you would just keep on living in it, renting it. So instead of saying, you know, $1,000 a month, you might just pay $500 a month in rent, and no one would even have to move out. You simply let people buy up whatever assets are left. All the banks are really out of business. What we're currently doing is we are destroying our currency until the house is still worth $200,000, but by then it's going to cost $600 to fill up your fridge. That is the course that we have embarked upon. We're going to destroy the currency until we wiped out all the losses the banks have. They aren't listing their houses on the market. So they are allowed to say the houses are still worth $200,000, when really they're maybe worth half of that. If you let the prices drop, all the banks are out of business again. It's a black hole we can throw money down. So our government is deliberately siphoning off the wealth of the entire country. The reason why energy prices go up is because there's more dollars chasing the same amount of goods. And that forces prices up. They haven't raised taxes at all for these 10 years of wars, so it's inflation. That's where prices are going up. But if we did this, all of us could at least afford to move into the houses we accidentally built. We could at least enjoy them. The dot-com bubble, we got a few good companies out of it. But the housing bubble, we could at least afford to live in these houses, but they're not letting this happen. So even as we speak, this TARP thing is actually still going on. And again, this is not what traditional progressivism is about. I understand your question, the criticism about that, but the crisis we're going to get because we bailed out the banks is so much worse. Again, they're still underwater, and the economy can never recover while this is going on. And that is, again, where our wealth is going to. We should at least be moving them. Alan Greenspan, who quit right before everything went to shit. Damn it. Anyway, he quit right before everything went bad. He just said that he just came out saying we should destroy houses. We should actually break down houses so that raise the prices of houses. This is what they're saying. These are the people that the ideas that run our country. So go ahead.
Remember that subsidizing, like paying farmers not to produce milk?
What's that?
It was pretty much subsidizing, like pretty much like saying let's not pay farmers to produce milk, therefore milk prices control.
Yeah, that's the stuff we did during the Great Depression. I'm going to come to that.
That's why he's trying to do with housing now. Greenspan, the Federal Reserve Chairman, I think was his name, from the Bush administration, all of them. They all suggested pretty much subsidizing housing. And even with the car market, we had thousands of cars sitting on empty lots. They refused to put them in the lot because they were trying prices where it wouldn't even be worth it the time and money for the public to pay.
Okay. So here's another fairly important thing, everyone. The big event that's going to happen is when China stops lending us money. That's the big event. We say they have to keep on lending us money. There's no way out of it. Please pay attention. This is really important stuff here. But they do not need to keep on lending us money. We have borrowed $1 trillion from them so far. Now, the current budget projection says we're going to have $1 trillion deficits the next 10 years. We might even end up with more. We currently borrow half of our money from China. That's just like saying then we're going to pen them in for another $5 trillion. There's no way they're going to tolerate this. The only way they do this, when our politicians are saying they're manipulating their currency, they're going through an industrial revolution. They are farmers and they're moving into factories. They don't mind working in factories for 10 or 20 years to leave something better for their kids. People there save 1/3 of their money. That's how it works over there. Chinese people are saving 1/3 of our money. We did that too during our industrial revolution. But so their government is currently printing up money, stealing purchasing power from them and lending it to us so we get purchasing power. They are simply, like, if they stop doing this, their currency will rise against ours, and instead of them making $800 refrigerators for us, they will make $80 refrigerators for themselves. China does not need us. This is all a big lie. They are golden moving forward. They produce things. Every Sunday is an export-based economy. They have a production-based economy. They are currently feeding themselves, and producing refrigerators and everything and iPads and sending it to us. If they consume them themselves, they would be better off as people. They could eat these things themselves, but they are sending us off some of their labor, and we're sending them worthless IOUs back. This system's going to come to an end. Some big Chinese exporters benefit from it. China has different intentions here and there. I don't think they're going to take over the world militarily. They're not like us in that respect. But they are stealing purchasing power from their citizens. They're eventually going to have to stop doing that. So that's why the housing bubble started. You had 1% interest rates. It made people funnel all their wealth and creativity in just the wrong businesses. So I also talked about what went wrong in the housing bubble and dot-com bubble that preceded it. Again, we should have had a recession in 2001. George Bush wanted to start these wars and get re-elected, so we had a housing bubble instead. And we are so much in debt right now. Yes.
I'm looking at are we headed, I think, the next bubble, what I would say? Isn't it the credit bubble?
There is a bubble in government bonds right now. Eventually, people aren't gonna keep on lending governments money, and interest rates are gonna have to go up. But that's a bond market you and I really can't access to it, and no one should buy in it anyway. And I'm gonna get to that. I'm gonna get to that crisis coming. But now I'm gonna talk about the gold reserve standard and the dollar reserve standard. Anyone heard the dollar reserve standard? That term, that the dollar has been the world's reserve currency. We didn't know these things. You have to know these things, and I don't blame anyone for not knowing this. Most people have kids. They live their lives. We call it well, anyway, it's totally okay not to know this kind of stuff. It's very rational. You want to know what's going on in your life, focus on becoming good at what you're doing. You're not supposed to be interested in politics. You're supposed to live your life and do things. But tragically, these people that we gave keys to the country, they destroyed the country. We should be able to just live in a free republic and do our thing, you know, but tragically they have wars and all this nonsense. So, oh yeah, some people should definitely be in charge and stow their creative energy making things better for us. But most people should be able just to live their lives. But I'm very happy everyone's here. So at the end of World War II, the whole rest of the world was destroyed by bombs and all that. We had 50% of the world's factories, and we had 80% of the world's gold. Everyone decided to go on something called the dollar reserve standard. It was an agreement, the Bretton Woods Agreement is what they called it. The Austrians said there's no way it can work. Everyone would simply get $35 for an ounce of gold. So if you had 35 US dollars, you would get an ounce of gold. We printed up a lot of money in the 60s by having a war, Vietnam Wars and all this kind of stuff, and we went to the moon, and we built 40,000 or however many nukes we built. They spent a lot of money in printing dollars. They didn't tax us enough for it, even though we had 50% of the world's factories. We had a baby boom during that period because there was so much prosperity going around, and that's part of the reason why we have a social security crisis. That's one of the last items I'll address here. But we're the world's reserve currency. When Sweden buys oil, they buy it in US dollars from Saudi Arabia. If Sweden prints up 10% extra money, they devalue their currency. It happens sort of overnight. They get inflation. When we print it up and Japan buys our debt and holds on to it, we'll still do indefinitely because we provide them their military defense. China won't do it indefinitely. But those dollars don't circulate in our economy and chase goods. That's why we have a giant military empire. Anyone ever been abroad? We're generally wealthier than people in Europe. Maybe every American owns a car, while maybe 1 out of 5 European owns a car. But how are we so wealthy? We have a giant military. Because since World War II, we've been the world's reserve currency. In '68, some French people figured out we were printing up money, so they would take, let's say, an ounce of gold and get, let's say 100 Swedish crowns, or I'm sorry, numbers here, but they would maybe start out with $35, buy an ounce of gold, buy a different currency, buy $70, buy 2 ounces of gold, buy a different currency, get $140, buy 4 ounces of gold. Because we had been printing, it was obvious. Nixon closed the gold window in '71. Technically, we defaulted as a country when that happened. We said we're not going to pay promises we promised we're going to make to keep. And when our current administration is saying that unless we raise the debt ceiling, we won't be able to pay off our debtors, or our creditors, he's sort of lying because he should be assuring them that no matter what, we will pay you guys off. That should be the number one thing. We will make our commitments. It's 10% of our budget right now, the federal budget, paying interest. But that might rise if interest rates go up. But so we've been able to print this, and this is all coming to an end. They had price controls in the 70s when they only had 4% inflation. And now a lot of free market people are saying we had 9% inflation last year, not 2%. So in the 70s, after that, the dollar lost 2/3 of its value. It's a really, really big event. If you had a dime from 1961, you could buy a gallon of gas for it. If you were made of silver, we had real money back then. But so because of inflation, we're getting poor. And to defend the dollar from inflation, Ronald Reagan and Paul Volcker, they made interest rates 20% to stop inflation. Because eventually, when people want to lend money to our governments, they're going to want a higher return on it. because it's pretty stupid to get 4% from the government and you know there's 9% inflation. That's going to come to an end. Everyone's going to leave the U.S. bond market. This is a bubble, and it's happening in Europe. In fact, it would have unraveled here quicker unless we were already paying attention to everything that's going wrong in Europe. There's a lot more stuff going on there. And let me tell you, one reason why we have hope and other countries don't is in Greece, there were zero protests until the austerity cuts came. Now we're protesting years in advance before it's really urgent. But so we are much better at being American, being independent, and making government work for us than they are in other countries. They didn't complain at all until it was completely falling apart. We're doing it earlier. What's up?
So what you're saying is that our U.S. bond bubble is going to be when other countries start seeing that there's no possible way we can pay.
What people are doing now is they're buying commodities. They're going into just buying tons and tons of steel or tons and tons of copper. That's not going to decrease in value, just to protect themselves from what's going to happen. Back in the day, national debt was mostly owned by Americans and on 30-year treasury bills. Nowadays, our national debt, about a third of it is short-term paper. This means not 30-year treasury bills like it used to be, and anyone, if you own them, just sell them. Dump all your government bonds right now. If you happen to own one from your kid, just you can find actually buyers for them, even though you're halfway through it. Just get rid of them. But the treasury bills, Greece didn't all of a sudden accumulate a lot of new debt. What happened was the interest rate went up for them, and they couldn't service the debt anymore. Instead of lending at 5%, all of a sudden they had to lend at 20 or borrow at 20, and then they had riots in the streets. So about a third of our debt is 6-month paper, 3-month paper, 2-year paper, and it's not that they let's say I lend you $1 million and you owe me $100,000 in interest a year, and you're burdened by that servicing that. When a bond matures, you pay back the full amount. So you give me $1 million plus interest right there and then. You don't pay interest. So what's going to happen is as these things mature, the reset interest rate is going to be much higher, and there's absolutely no way we can service this. There's no way that these, right now we're paying $200 billion in interest. It might go up to $1 trillion in interest a year if the interest rate, you have to lend at a higher thing. Or we're going to end up with inflation, which will also cause riots in the streets. This stuff is coming and it can't be stopped. You should have not bailed out the banks. This crisis is coming is worse than the monetary crisis that maybe is ahead of us. And again, we need to take care of ourselves. Or take care of each other.
What can we do?
Well, we can pull the troops home right now. The Soviet system, they just went bankrupt overnight and they had to pull home other troops. If we pull home all our troops now and stop giving money to companies and they need to cut a lot of government spending. There are promises that have been made that even if we cut 100% of the military spending, we're not going to do that. But even if we did that, we still wouldn't balance the budget. So we need to cut things that people are going to hurt. There's no way around it. We've been having wars and then we've been borrowing and printing against it. So there's absolutely no way to protect ourselves completely from this. It's going to get bad. We need politicians who will be honest and say, we can't just talk about more labor rights or something like that. We are bankrupt, and I'm going to lay out that thing a little bit more. But China right now has more capitalism than we have. When they took over Hong Kong, everyone was afraid that they were going to convert them and make them be communists and stuff like that. But they copied what Hong Kong did. They copied the free markets, and pretty much Hong Kong, they had a 15% income tax. The British were there for 100 years. And they made sure people didn't murder each other in the streets, and they enforced contract law. And they sat back and drank tea and let those mongrels rule themselves. And they went from third world to first world in 50 years. Because if you let people be free and be creative and do their own thing, they will come up with awesome things. And part of it's making trinkets for us, we know that. And now they do the next more, cooler stuff. But again, Russia, all they could export was fur and vodka. That's a communist system. The Chinese can export cell phones. Those are natural resources. Anyone can export that. The Chinese are exporting iPads and cell phones. There is no way. And let me tell you some advice here in life. One thing we're going to have a growth industry in is going to be farming. We're going to be selling food to these people. We're going to be selling meat to these people as they get a growing middle class. If you want to study agriculture science, last year we graduated more gym teachers than farmers and agriculture science majors. We need farmers, and that's where the BMW is going to be in the future, in Alabama, not in New York City, where there's not going to be any financial stuff there anymore. It's not going to be the capital of the world of finance anymore, and because we don't even accumulate the capital here. There's no reason why everything should be all that should happen in the States, because we're not even the industrialists of the world anymore. But anyway, so the Chinese have more capitalism than we have. It's a police state, but they have more free markets than we have, and that's why they're becoming wealthier. And we don't have as much free markets. And if you want to be successful in life for your kids, you should maybe learn Chinese. And it won't guarantee success in life, but the American era is over. 200 years ago, 1811, London was the best place in the world to live. That was the center of the universe, British Empire. The sun never sets on it. 100 years ago, 1911, New York was the best place in the world to live. I was born in New York, the greatest city that ever existed. And now 2011 is somewhere in Asia, maybe it's Shanghai or something like that. And no one from Asia has ever gotten a Nobel Prize in economics. It's always Europeans and Americans. Like they are doing what's right. They're saving. We've been making these mistakes about spending way too much for a long time. But the best way to describe our economy right now is our economy, we are like Germany after World War II. We have no factories. It doesn't matter if they were destroyed by bombs or if we assembled them and sent them off to other countries and lived off of that money by buying shit. So we are like Germany after World War II. We have no factories and we have a massive debt. No promises can be made. We are bankrupt and it's going to get bad. And again, the best thing to do is bring home the troops now and somehow balance the budget so our currency doesn't go out of hand. What's going to happen is eventually they're not going to, when China stops lending us, our government officials are going to do one of two things. They're either going to go to the printing press, or the better situation, they pull home all the troops and balance the budget then. And maybe they'll deal with it when you finally can't suspend it anymore, but they're just kicking the can down the road. China, businesses, but what they might do is go to the printing press and just keep it together for a few more years, maintain the military empire. I think they are that bloodthirsty, the people that have run our country long enough. So if we pull on the troops before that happens, we can have a lot softer of a fall, and America can do much better moving forward. But we're no longer number one in technology. They make all these nice statements and stuff like that. The VCR, the microwave oven, we came up with that stuff. These last few years, Japan came up with the DVD player and the solid-state hard drive. Every component for the iPad was developed maybe in Japan or invented. And then it took an American like Steve Jobs to put it all together, of course. So we are very different in that respect. But we are not number one anymore, and it's silly for them to keep on talking about. So I want to talk about why America is so rich, where that innovation comes from, and eventually then I'm going to get to the solutions, how we need to get out of this. But in Europe, they had guilds. Guilds are better than nothing. It meant that if you got shoes from a certain city, they met a certain quality standard, and that was it. But they kept people from entering the market. In Sweden, they actually have a guild in hairdressers. You can only go to hairdressing school if you did it in high school. It doesn't exist later. And they decide people in the city decide how many new hairdressers let into the market. So if you're a guy, you got to pay a lot for a haircut, and you also have to be in line even on a weekday, because they restrict the amount of people enter it. So it's better than no guilds, but what we had is free markets, no rules. Anyone do whatever they want. We don't have those rules anymore. We look just like Europe, except for Americans still think like Americans. But we have all those rules. Think about the internet's the only place without rules. Anyone you know who started a business, it's always an internet business. You can't start a regular store that isn't a franchise because you might not have all the people come with you and you can't get the loans. And McDonald's has a guaranteed loan stuff. So it's so hard to start businesses nowadays. The only thing people do is starting internet businesses. We should be building new ways of making products for people, new ways of delivering food. I would love if at an intersection a Mexican lady could give me a sandwich. Every morning I can see that same lady and she can feed me breakfast and eventually she'll know what I want. There's all these kind of things we can do that are illegal. So and it's been working because we've been able to print up the world's gold. The world has sent us goods and we sent them worthless dollar bills. We've been all living in this fake bubble. When people say we're lazy and stuff like that, it's because we've been able to still prosper even though we're not good at anything anymore. Our car companies, when they eventually rebuilt their factories in Europe, they destroyed us. So we had an advantage because initially we had an advantage because we had freer markets. Now we only had an advantage because we had all the factories left in the world after World War II. But see, a lot of people think that it's because of slavery America was rich. But in that case, the South would have won the war. A slave was a piece of capital goods that cost $50,000 to bring over and a lot to feed. Like there was a lot of money. Eventually, capitalism, people would have been cheaper to have tractors and slaves, and it would eliminate. The British just bought their slaves and freed them. That's how the British Empire solved it all. We had a big bloody civil war. We're not rich because we killed the Indians and took their land. Wish Eli was here so I could say that. But it was terrible. It was a terrible crime. But the land was already there in Europe. It was people that developed the land that did really creative things. And more stuff happened in America than in Europe. The Dark Ages. How come they had no technology for all these years? Because no one got to keep the stuff they made. When the Irish got the innovation of potatoes, they just made the plot smaller for each family. If I figured out to start doing crop rotating, you rotate what you grow, you get a lot bigger harvests. Someone invented that, but if I can't spread that idea to every single one, it's more like one creative guy that does it and no one benefits from it. Free markets allow those ideas to spread. And eventually, instead of taking 90% of us to feed the other 10%, it only takes 30% of us to feed everyone else. And then we had the Industrial Revolution. It was better. People prefer to work in factories and live in stoop labor on farms. When we say that they need a minimum wage or in other countries or get rid of child labor, those families are so poor, they need the additional income from their children to be able to do this. It's not that parents over there are really, really cruel, but if you cut out that child's salary, they're going to starve to death. And we banned child labor in Bangladesh, and all these young girls, 12-year-old girls, went into prostitution, and we didn't even apologize for it afterwards. So like these are unintended consequences of regulations. But eventually, during the Great Depression, we actually had 30% of us were actually farmers. But think about it, before capitalism in the 1200s or whatever, no one ever protested against poverty or child labor. They didn't even imagine that we could be so productive. Think about how much we work to get food. Maybe 3% of us are busy with it, I don't know. We are so productive that we get the leisure here. And even though the economy's fallen apart, like if this crisis was happening 100 years ago, we'd all be starving to death today. That's what would be going on. But we're so much wealthier nowadays. But no one protested 1,000 years ago about poverty. They never even imagined that you could be so wealthy. Similarly, politicians who think that the world's going to fall apart unless we use them, they never thought the world could support. They thought 200 years ago that wars would be permanent. You would always have wars because you would need to conquer the lands adjacent to you just not to get absorbed by someone else. But it turns out the creativity inside the human mind produces so much more than just owning large acres of land. Like the steel, the glass, everything that goes on the iPhone, it's been there for thousands of years. We just figured out how to assemble them into a really useful way. So a lot of the stuff we get talks about like Charles Dickens, how terrible it was and stuff like that. Kids being exploited, but they don't talk about how people lived right before that. They were on farms and they died starving. It was better to move into factories. It really was better, and then eventually their children can do something slightly better. That's really how it works. We slowly built our nation back then. That's what they're doing right now in China. So don't worry, I promise you, I'm gonna get to a lot of good stuff here. Are you enjoying this so far? Like our history books say our government say, hate people like Andrew Carnegie because he made so much money or whatever. He made steel 90% cheaper. So now we have railroads that transport food to cities instead of horse and wagons. Every American lives 5 years longer because of him. And our textbooks say he's evil capitalist, so we got to watch out for. Rockefeller, he was this evil capitalist. He figured out to make kerosene out of this pollutant that came out of the land in people in Texas, oil. He probably saved the whales. Y'all read Moby Dick? The only rich people had light at night. They would use whale oil. So he actually saved the whales. You're not going to read about that in the textbook. But so it's not that the rich people get much richer from capitalism. All of us, say 200 years ago, you couldn't enjoy music in your own house. You had to have a private musician play for you. But now we have iPods. Like a lot of the common man has benefited from this modern society we live in. It's not about a distribution problem. The rich people will still have yachts and stuff like that. We need to have some incentive for them to work that hard. But we will all be able to enjoy these products that they have made. And again, cell phones are so much better. A 3-pound chicken might have costed 2 hours of labor 50 years ago, but now just 20 minutes of labor. If it weren't for inflation, we'd be getting richer. So our standard of living really comes from not the government passing laws, but people making inventions that make our life better, and then people getting more savings, capital, to build so we can make these things cheaper. Like someone invented the tractor, it was a while before everyone had enough savings that we could all build tractors and have them. So it takes a while to accumulate that. And there's nothing the government can do to improve that process. We simply need to have people inventing things and get more savings so we can build more things that produce for us. And Detroit is an example of this. They wanted to promise a lot for their people, and it had good salaries for a while, but eventually other people competed with them, and Detroit is what all of America is going to look like in 20 years unless we change our course. It is the Rust Belt. They call it different reasons. They still make cars there, but it used to be the car capital of the world, just like New York used to be the financial capital of the world, and it's not going to be that way anymore. But again, the rich are not rich because they're poor. It's because of inflation that's squeezing us, and it squeezes the people on the margins the most, because it's impossible to save up money for your retirement because they can print up money and decrease the value of your savings. So now I'm going to go back a little bit more and talk about the Federal Reserve and the Great Depression. And thank you very much for being patient, by the way. Is this useful at all, by the way?
Definitely.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So in 1913, we got both the Federal Reserve and the income tax. And before that, we actually didn't have an income tax. It sounds really radical, but it didn't seem legitimate of people founded this country that you would be allowed to take money from someone else. It sounds really crazy, but that's actually why we became really rich. We can maybe afford some government now, but back then, if we would have had a 40% income tax and child labor laws 250 years ago, you know the Oregon Trail? Everyone would have starved to death if your children weren't allowed to work and we had to pay 40% taxes. What's up? Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm wondering, this is something I had to get a chance to look up because I slipped my mind. But when they instituted the federal income tax in 1913, I know a lot of people would have resisted that, obviously, at first. So did they slowly do that?
Yeah, the income tax only applied to the rich at first. It only applied to the rich, so most people didn't pay it. And And eventually, by World War II, they took it out of your tax automatically. It's called the victory tax, and they never got rid of that. So otherwise, you had to pay at the end of the year. And so again, initially when they had the income tax, most people didn't pay it. But here's, you ever heard of the term bracket creep? You're paying a certain tax bracket because of inflation. You actually get pushed up into higher tax brackets. So even though they never raised taxes on us, everyone maybe was paying 30% taxes when they used to pay 5% with the same system from back then. It's called bracket creep. They trick us to pay higher and higher taxes. And interestingly, the Swedish author Astrid Lindgren, you know, Pippi Longstocking, world's strongest girl, come on, Pippi Longstocking, right? I cried when she died anyway, but she had to pay 104% of income tax one year. She had to, there was some kind of, I don't know what bureaucrat came up with that, but she had to pay 104% income tax, more than she made because she was a children's book author. It's crazy. So what China's doing right now, they're supporting our military empire. It would have ended by now if it weren't for it. We similarly, after World War I, we printed up a lot of money so that all the British gold, the British was the British Empire still back then, so all that wouldn't flood into our country. All the gold wouldn't flood in. So we printed up money just like China's printing up money then. We had a bubble, we had a really bad crash in 1920, 25% unemployment. Government did nothing because they didn't really do stuff back then. It wasn't until the 30s they started doing stuff. And a year later, 18 months later, it was as if nothing happened. Everyone was employed again. In the 1930s, they did a lot. And they still haven't explained why this thing went on for 10 years. Like, it wasn't remarkable that there was 25% unemployment. What was remarkable that it was for 10 consecutive years. How come couldn't hire anyone profitably? And but anyway, they did all these things, and an example of it is you heard of cash for clunkers? The idea to help people buy new cars. You want to destroy something that currently works and borrow money. You can't spend on other consumer goods in the economy. You got to like keep on paying interest rates for the Japanese car you bought. If that stuff worked, you would always do those things. They all make us poor. Another example of something like that would be in the Great Depression, they tilled over soil. They tilled over farmers' soil, and they burnt 6 million pigs because they wanted to keep farm prices up. Americans were starving to death eating ketchup sandwiches, and our government was burning pigs like grapes of wrath. You know, they were burning like mountains of oranges to keep the prices up. It's terrible stuff that they did all this. And now I'm going to talk about, a lot of people say, do we need more socialism? Is that what we're going to get? And is that how we fix this problem? And the Austrian economist said that socialism cannot work. We didn't need to go to war with the Soviets. And the reason why it doesn't work is there's no pricing system for goods and services if you don't have a free market. Like, I know maybe how to make a car. You need so much steel, you need so much glass, you need so much rubber, you need so many man hours, so many managerial hours, factories, you need electricity. I know all those inputs, but I don't know what the price of a car should be or the components that go into that. Maybe that steel needs to be put in steel bras or something like that. Like, no one knows how to allocate the resources. The Soviets, they had 5-year plans, and they looked at the Wall Street Journal to figure out like what they should price ore at or whatever they were buying. But they didn't need to do that because maybe they produced less steel than we did, but they had an easier time producing grain, but they were topping our prices. And you had shortages and lines, and it wasn't just shortages of lines. They were becoming poorer and poorer every year. For 20 years in the end, we send them food subsidies, and they were the breadbasket of Europe. You could actually take soil from Russia and throw it onto other countries' soils and use it as fertilizer. That's how like fertile their soil was. And our soil is really good too. Again, we're going to export food to China. That's our future. And if you learn Chinese, it won't guarantee success in life. But let's say if you end up at a restaurant, or your kid ends up at a restaurant, it might be the difference between being a dishwasher in the back and being a maitre d' in the front. So learn Chinese, young people here. But one thing I remember when I went to Russia once, and they had these Bunsen burners. You know, you do chemistry experiments in chemistry lab. But they built like 80% of it, but not the rest. So they just squandered money because it didn't make it into the next 5-year plan. But they had towards the end also 42% of their food was produced on people's yards. So they had tractors rusting in the fields because they maybe didn't get repair parts. Society can't work without free markets, and socialism fails because they don't have those things. And we got really afraid when they sent Sputnik over, so we started NASA. They had the highest PhD per capita in the Soviet Union. They argued about 0% unemployment, but their people were starving to death. And they sent up Sputnik. So we had NASA. We didn't need to do stuff like NASA either. Doesn't it make sense that we would have invented like the computer and internet before we would have sent people to space? Like the amount of resources it takes to do either. Yes, you can't build something without getting something good out of it. We got the computers out of it. But our government cannot innovate our way out of it. We need people like Thomas Edison to come up with the next power source. That's the only way we're going to get out of this kind of thing. But And maybe if it weren't for government doing all these things, in the 60s we got washing machines and dishwashers. They are capital goods. You can use them to go to work instead of make more money. It's not like you're just using them for fun. Capital, by the way, is something that you can use that doesn't produce, or that you won't consume, like a tractor is capital. So everyone technically uses capital. But so women could enter the workforce, and it wasn't just because of women's liberation. We were printing money and we began to become poor. And by 1985, 50% of women were working, but that's because we just raised taxes every single year. Again, we didn't have an income tax until 1913, and it didn't affect most people until World War II. And then they had bracket creep, and now we're slaves. We're paying 40% of our income to people who we didn't really want that for. Go ahead.
And the income tax was basically like unconstitutional. They passed a supposedly amendment, but it never really changed anything.
If you write the IRS, they can actually, they cannot produce a piece of legislation that says we're actually by law required to pay income tax.
Yeah, it became.
I'm gonna go sit on the cigarette.
Sure.
We talked already.
Yeah.
So I don't
Get out of
want
here.
you to think that
Now I'm gonna talk about social.
I want to hear what you have to say, and I want to talk to you later as well.
Okay, I'm gonna talk about Social Security right now, and this is the big thing. Even if it weren't for this massive debt, Social Security is so bankrupt. They're not being honest with us, and the reason why I'm angry with government is because the country's falling apart. By now we should have 3-day work weeks. Not because we're smart or something, but because people generations before built this country already, and we are so much wealthier than we were back then. But if it weren't for government doing spending, maybe we could have done that. Again, we're in debt now. Social Security was something, there wasn't a public outcry for it. They just created it because they want us to be dependent on them. And initially, Social Security, people over 65, most people didn't live that long, so it really wasn't that big of a deal. And it was sold to us like a private insurance program. And they take 6.25% from you and 6.25% from your employer. It's like it's like 12.5% total. That's what it is of our income goes to Social Security. And what they haven't told us is that they spent all the money even when Bush and Gore were talking about the lockbox, remember that thing? They already spent all the money. They spent all the money in the 60s building nukes, and they also printed for that, but they spent all the Social Security surpluses. Now, so there is no fund there. It's just the money that's currently coming in and promises that younger taxpayers will have to absorb those costs. And it's Clinton in '94 had a commission look into this, look into the Social Security problem. And they said by 2020, the entire federal budget will be eaten up only by Social Security, Medicaid, and military retirement. And everything else you get from the Army, roads, military, it will be completely consumed by that because of this. You have so many kids between 46 and 64. And now the numbers are, this is the government's own numbers. If you are 65 years old today, you're going to collect $140,000 more than you paid in. But if you're 25 today, you're going to pay in $300,000 more than you're going to collect. That's like a $500 tax a month for you that you won't get a penny for. You're going to be slaves to people who were born in a different calendar year. There's no way these commitments can be made. If we make cuts to it now, everyone over 55 can keep the same system, bring home the troops. If we wait any longer, it's going to be too late, and we're going to have to cut it. And an example of it is we haven't raised it twice a year in a row. There hasn't been any inflation adjustments to it, so we're already cutting Social Security. And last year was the first year we had to borrow for it. This problem is so much more imminent than any kind of social justice speech about the people I have seen. We are the people. There is no way government can solve this. It's $100 trillion in commitments. It makes our national debt peanuts compared to that.
So you're talking about the tax. I remember, and I'm only 48, but I remember the day you filed your income tax and you received your federal income tax, which is just like you do today. But you also got state tax back. Now you don't do that. You don't get returned on your state tax.
I mean, just the last few years or what?
Back in the day. You filed it in the year you filed your income tax. Now you only get your federal back. There is no return on the state.
I feel you.
Is that part of that tax?
Well, they should be taxing us in the first place. And this is a weird thing. When they tax us, there's less money left for capital investments for big businesses. Like eventually we accumulate enough savings. People can help each other. They have mutual aid societies. They don't need government to do all this kind of stuff. And these groups are racist. Like they only help blacks, they only help Irish people or whatever. And they help you get a job and maybe you can stay in the dormitory and something to transition to homelessness. And they knew if you needed welfare or if you needed a kick in the butt because it was their personal money. When you get money from government, they don't really care about it. So they're very wasteful stuff to take care of people. But if you accept the principle of the income tax, even 1%, if you accept a 1% income tax, then you're accepting the government owns all of our labor but lets us keep a certain amount. And they just raise it over time. So I believe that it's the big thing about political activity or how to look at it is When is it okay to initiate force against another human being? That's what libertarians try to answer. When is it okay to initiate force against another human being? Maybe if you did something bad, you can initiate force against him, or did fraud or something. But I can't take money from one person, no matter how good-hearted I am. Like, we accept here, we can't go demand that someone's going to give us money to build our camp here. But it's okay for me to have a government mediator take money from people. That's where we went wrong. Europe has a lot more of that than we do. But anyway, so I'm going to talk about what money is right now. It's very important. The stuff we use is not money. It's paper bills. It used to say on every piece of paper you can redeem it for a certain amount of gold or silver. It was worth something. And to describe how money came in, governments didn't create money. It popped up out of the marketplace. In fact, it probably existed before we had language. Imagine if you had like some tribe of monkey people, another tribe of monkey people, and maybe one of them made really good fishing equipment, like some kind of nets, and the other one made good clays, like clay pottery. And they would swap with each other. And maybe I go out halfway in between, I drop off the pottery, back away, and then you can, oops! Oh, that where goes the wind. Can you mount that on me if you would?
Yeah, I got you. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Open it up and make sure it's working. So anyway,
I've got it. Go ahead.
oops, it fell over like this. What's it saying? Probably shut off there. No, it's still filming. Okay, right on. I want to be filming my head, and I don't want to film me up in the sky because then it looks all black. Let's see if you can figure out how to assemble that.
I got it. Go ahead. Continue. I got it.
Right. Well, train on me. But anyway, so what money is? It's obviously rather impractical if you don't need any more clay pottery or something like that. So things became money that popped up out of the marketplace, and gold and silver became really, really popular. You could use grains, but they can go bad. So the characteristics of money is at first it has to be scarce. You can't just pay more of it. So money really isn't good. They can print, and there's nothing that keeps them from writing a $1 million dollar bill. There's nothing that keeps that from happening really. So so money, it has to be something you can divide into pieces. Like if you have a diamond and you break it into two smaller pieces, it's only worth 1/8 of the larger diamond. So a diamond can't be used as currency. No government decided gold was supposed to be used as currency, and it's even in the Bible. Like they've used gold as currency all the way back then. It has to be something that's scarce again and indestructible. If a ship sinks, then ship sinks, you'll still lift it up and get the gold out. It's indestructible. It's really worth something.